Hello, this is Jane, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the July 9 issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And I'm going to start on the front page, and I will begin with the headline here, which reads, "A Battle Against Time. Cancer Patient Seeks Access to Breakthrough Therapy Amid Funding Delays." And this article is carried on in the inside of the paper, and the title reads, "GTA Father Can Access Cancer Treatment. Breakthrough Therapy Could Help Fight Aggressive Disease, but Isn't Covered by Provincial Drug Plans." And there is a picture here of Alex Shved, 37, and his wife Agata and their two children. And he says he is suffering from metastatic melanoma and hopes to undergo a personalized cell treatment produced by a U.S. company. It shows a picture of him with his family, and he's holding his little baby. This is by Megan Ogilvy. Alex Shved is running out of options and out of time. The metastatic melanoma invading his body has stopped responding to standard treatments and is spreading unchecked through his bones and lungs. At 37 and still healthy enough to work and enjoy backyard barbecues with friends, Shved is desperate to try any new therapy that might help. With two young daughters at home, one a toddler, the other just 3 months, he said he's not ready to give up. Shved has his sights on a personalized cell treatment produced by a U.S. company and approved by Health Canada last year. The tumor infiltrating lymphocyte therapy, or TIL therapy, is marketed as Lifileucel and uses a patient's own cells to train their immune system to find and attack cancer. Results from melanoma patients have been promising, but for Shved, getting access to the therapy may come too late. Lifileucel, also known by its brand name Amtagvi, is not covered by provincial drug plans. It has only just entered Canada's drug funding system, a process that can take more than 2 years. Shved has petitioned the province for out-of-country coverage to go to the U.S. for treatment, but was denied. He and his wife Agata can't afford the $1.5 million quoted by a U.S. hospital. Shved said he's not sure what he and other patients like him are supposed to do. "My timeline is weeks and months," he said. "I don't have a year to find out if it's going to get approved for funding." Shved is among the thousands of Canadians forced to wait for public coverage of new treatments due to a complex drug funding system that critics say prioritizes rigor over speed. The multi-step process requires new drugs and therapies to not just gain Health Canada approval, but also to undergo a lengthy assessment to determine if the drug's benefits justify the cost, followed by price negotiations with the manufacturer. Only then do provinces and territories decide whether to publicly fund the drug. A 2025 federal study found that, on average, it takes 906 days for new drugs to be added to public formularies. Experts say Canada's layered review process ensures the drugs that get funded will benefit patients and are a reasonable use of public money. But others, including Dr. Sandeep Sadev, a medical oncologist and assistant professor at the Ottawa Cancer Centre, say the system is far too slow, especially for patients with aggressive cancers. "One of the hardest conversations," he said, "is telling patients that a treatment exists, but that the public system may not be able to deliver it in time." Shved was diagnosed with melanoma in 2020 after having a large mole removed from his upper abdomen. He believed he was free and clear. 3 years later, a biopsy of a swollen lymph node confirmed the cancer had returned. Shved had surgery and started on immunotherapy. In 2024, with his wife 5 months pregnant with their first daughter, Shved learned the melanoma had metastasized to his bones, including his spine, pelvis, ribs, and neck. He said he was shocked. He had felt no pain even while lifting weights and working out. It felt so surreal. I thought, this is all just some crazy dream, and when I wake up, everything's going to be back to normal. Another targeted therapy kept the cancer in check for more than a year. But by late 2025, it was clear the latest treatment was failing. This past winter, a tennis ball-sized tumor broke through a bone in his arm. In the spring, scans detected fast-growing nodules in his lungs. Shved turned his focus to TIL therapy. He said his Toronto oncologist told him the therapy was promising, but not yet available in Canada. One agreed to help him apply to the provincial government for out-of-country funding to receive TIL therapy in a U.S. hospital. Dr. Simon Turcotte, a surgical oncologist and leader in cellular immunotherapy at Montreal's CHUM Research Center, said TIL therapy is more akin to a bone marrow or organ transplant than a traditional drug. The one-time infusion is produced from T cells, a type of lymphocyte or white blood cell harvested from a patient's tumor that have been multiplied into an army of billions in a laboratory, Turcotte said. The procedure includes 5 days of chemotherapy to prep the patient's immune system to receive a new cancer-fighting infusion. Turcotte, who is not involved in Shved's care, said the goal is for the T cells to proliferate once back in the body to fight cancer for as long as possible. He said hospital-based clinical trials have been encouraging, with half of metastatic melanoma patients getting a positive response and 1 in 5 experiencing long-term results. Iovance Biotherapeutics, the American biotechnology company behind Amtagvi, requires its therapy to be administered at authorized centers in the U.S. Shved said he's looked into receiving Amtagvi at a Florida hospital. In a statement, a spokesperson for Iovance said it's committed to partnering closely with federal and provincial officials to expedite both treatment readiness and reimbursement so patients can access Amtagvi. Canada's drug agency, which evaluates the clinical evidence and cost-effectiveness of new drugs, said in a statement that it received Iovance's application for Amtagvi on June 18 and expects to its review will conclude in November. Since being denied out-of-country coverage, Shved, who lives in Etobicoke and works in finance, has sent hundreds of emails pleading his case, including to government officials, Health Minister Sylvia Jones, and Premier Doug Ford. Shved said he wants more information about the stated reason behind his application's denial, that the out-of-country prior approval program isn't a mechanism to fund drugs currently under review for public coverage in Ontario, and to ask officials what he should do instead. He said he's already appealed to the Health Services Appeal and Review Board, launched a judicial review of the original decision, and lodged a complaint to the Ontario Ombudsman. Last week, Shved said he received a phone call from Jones. He said Jones told him that she couldn't intervene in individual cases, but agreed to seek more information and to speak with her team. In a statement, a spokesman for Jones did not acknowledge questions about the call, but confirmed that provinces and territories do not provide out-of-country funding for treatments that have not yet gone through Canada's drug funding system, which includes price negotiations between the manufacturer and the PCPA, or Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance. Consistent with this approach, there have been no instances of Ontario approving out-of-country funding for a drug while it was actively undergoing the national PCPA negotiation process, Lily Barnes said. Last year, the Ford government launched the Fast Access to Supportive Therapies, or FAST program, which cuts about 6 months off the time it takes to get new cancer treatments to patients. Barnes said the program has so far sped up access to 9 therapies. Sadev said the FAST program works well for simple drugs, but is not designed for complex, personalized therapies such as TIL. He said out-of-country funding rules should be reassessed to consider new therapies like TIL that are more like a medical procedure. For now, Sadev said the province should approve out-of-country coverage, adding that patients with advanced cancers should not be penalized for bureaucratic delays. Turcotte said Canada needs a homegrown approach to TIL therapy that doesn't rely on high-cost commercial products, but instead keeps it within the public hospital system, a model that has seen success in the Netherlands. As a principal scientist with CanTIL-Me, the Canadian research group working to develop a hospital-made nonprofit TIL therapy, Turcotte said the country has the expertise and infrastructure to make the treatment at a much lower cost than private companies. He said CanTIL-Me is raising $15 million to create a sustainable program that can help hundreds of patients. We should not be just sitting and waiting for companies to produce these personalized treatments, Turcotte said, because that way it's not going to happen for all Canadians. Though he knows a made-in-Canada approach won't happen fast enough for him, Shved is excited by its possibilities. He enrolled in a Phase 1 clinical trial at Princess Margaret Cancer Center for another novel treatment, even as he continues his email campaign to gain access to out-of-country TIL therapy. Also from the front page, under the byline of courts, cop ex-girlfriend who defrauded dead man's estate lose their appeal. And this is by Betsy Powell. A former Toronto police officer and his ex-girlfriend stepped into custody Wednesday after losing the appeals of their convictions and sentences for defrauding the $834,000 estate of an elderly man with dementia. Robert Konashuek and Adeline Balgobin, once an employee of the Office of the Public Guardian and trustee, both received 7-year penitentiary sentences after a jury in Toronto convicted them of fraud in 2023, following a trial with a storyline fit for television, a love triangle, and an ex-spouse whose tip to authorities cracked open the scheme. Balgobin was also found guilty of breach of trust by a public officer in connection with her duties as a client representative at OPGT, where she was responsible for managing Heinz Sommerfeld's affair. He died in a long-term care home in June 2017 without a will, although he had a younger half-brother, Peter Stelter, who was the legal heir who should have received the money. Instead, a check for $834,351.55 was transferred into Konashuwicz's bank account. The money was recovered, but Stelter has been unable to collect any of the funds while awaiting the outcome of the appeal. The family's lawyer is now looking into when the funds will be available. It has been a long 9 years since my brother died, Stelter wrote in an email Wednesday, adding he is both relieved and happy with the court's decision. During the trial, prosecutors Sam Walker and Peter Scruton, who is now a judge, suggested it was absurd that Sommerfeld, who worked for 45 years as a draftsman for Ontario's Highway Department, left the entirety of his estate to the much younger Konashewich. Konashewich did not testify, so the Crowns were unable to cross-examine him about his alleged connection to Sommerfeld. Konashewich and Balgobin had asked the appellate court to reduce their sentences so that they could serve them conditionally in the community, or at most to send them to prison for between 2 to 3 years. The Court of Appeal for Ontario rejected the arguments, finding the trial judge made no errors in imposing sentence. It was the many severe aggravating factors in this case and the corrosive impact of the fraud on public trust in the police and the OPGT that drove the trial judge's decision to impose an exemplary sentence, wrote Justice Jonathan George. Justices Lise G. Favreau and Renee Pomerantz agreed. The decision was released Wednesday. Konashewich and Balgobin had been out on bail pending the result of this appeal. The appellants raised 2 main grounds of appeal of their convictions. Their lawyers argued the trial judge erred by admitting evidence that the appellants had attempted to conceal their affair from Candace Dixon, Konashewich's former girlfriend turned whistleblower. At trial, the Crown's position was that the evidence was relevant for narrative and critical to timing, given all the lies about the relationship when the fraud was in motion. However, the defense lawyers argued that evidence was irrelevant and had nothing to do with whether Konashewich was guilty of fraud, and that it created the risk of moral and reasoning prejudice. They also criticized the Crown for suggesting the pair had taken extreme steps to conceal their affair from Dixon. While the appellate court found the trial judge's reasoning justifying the admission of the evidence to be a bit concerning, the judge did not err in finding it to be probative and relevant, George wrote. He properly assessed the probative value of the concealment evidence and clearly apprehended its prejudicial effect, taking note that this conduct was not far removed from the facts underlying the offenses charged and that an affair today does not attract the same level of social opprobrium that it may have in the past. The panel also rejected the other key appeal ground that the trial judge, Justice Sean Dunphy, delivered an unbalanced jury charge, effectively directing the jury to convict. The appellant's complaints of imbalance are simply not borne on the record, the ruling says. This was a lengthy and complex trial which involved evidence that needed to be understood not only on its own but in relation to all the other evidence. Synthesizing the evidence and issues in this case was a formidable task which, in my view, the trial judge did quite well. Balgobin was in a clandestine relationship with Konashewich when he produced a will that named him an executor and estate trustee and sole beneficiary of Sommerfeld's estate. Balgobin assisted in the probate process by swearing an affidavit attesting to the authenticity of Sommerfeld's signature on the will and by corresponding with Konashewich's estate lawyers. Konashewich swore an affidavit in support of his fraudulent probate application, which included statements about his attempts to locate 2 witnesses to the will who never actually existed. None of this activity attracted any suspicion until Dixon, the former girlfriend, opened a letter from a bank addressed to Konashewich in connection to Sommerfeld's estate. She later opened a letter from a lawyer to Konashewitz that mentioned Balgobin. Dixon believed correctly that the pair were romantically involved and suspected they were up to no good. She provided the letter to the police, which led to the investigation, charges, convictions, and sentence. It's just not in my nature to turn a blind eye to something like that, Dixon wrote in an email to the Star after the ruling. Peter deserves to have his money back. I think the saddest part is that Heinz spent the last 10 years of his life away from his family, not knowing where he was and had no visitors. To die alone and then have what he worked for his entire life taken from him. Konashewitz was suspended with pay after his arrest in 2020 and through to his sentencing. He has been suspended without pay since December 2023. In light of today's court decision, we will initiate the process to terminate his employment, a Toronto police spokesperson said. And I need to pause here to remind you you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The next article is also from the front page under the byline of Defense. Feds look to boost Canadian military spending. U.S. firms excluded from $5 billion contract for Army vehicles. And this is by Alex Bollingal. The Carney government is showing its willingness to turn away from American companies as it tries to use its huge surge of military spending to boost the Canadian economy, rebuffing U.S. bids for a multi-billion-dollar Army vehicle contract and possibly shifting away from data analytics providers like the controversial American firm Palantir. Stephen Furr, the Secretary of State for Defense Procurement, defended a decision on Wednesday to narrow the contest for at least 1,600 new light utility vehicles for the Army to 2 Canadian companies, edging American bidders out of a contract worth up to $4.9 billion. Furr also suggested the government can stop spending millions of dollars on data analysis services from Palantir, a firm co-founded by billionaire Peter Thiel, a supporter of U.S. President Donald Trump, at a time when the Carney Liberals are striving for data sovereignty in Canada. The U.S. Embassy in Ottawa declined a request from the Star for comment. In an interview with the Star, Furr noted that the decision of the Military and Defense Department to use Palantir, which dates back to at least 2020, precedes his time in office, and that he believes Canadian firms can replace its services for future contracts. Defense Minister David McGuinty has defended awarding contracts to Palantir's Canadian subsidiary, but said last month that the government was looking at its use of Palantir's software. Canada has unbelievable capability that's gone largely ignored, Furr said. I think those types of services we could do here in Canada. Those types of capabilities we have that here in Canada. If we can do it in Canada, I would suggest that we do it in Canada. The Secretary of State made the same argument for the decision, first reported by CBC News, to limit the search for new Army utility vehicles to 2 Canadian companies that he refused to name. The CBC report said those dropped from the competition included U.S. companies AM General and Oshkosh Defense. Furr pointed to the government's defense industrial strategy, which is part of an effort to bolster domestic companies and reduce dependence on the United States as the Carney administration, citing threats from new technologies like drones, hypersonic missiles, and the dangers posed by Russia with its war in Ukraine and militarization in the Arctic, plans to pump hundreds of billions of dollars into military spending over the coming decade. Since taking office last year, Prime Minister Mark Carney has promised to make Canada less dependent on the U.S. by doubling exports to other countries by 2035 and rearming the Canadian military with the highest levels of defense spending since the end of the Cold War. Through the Defense Industrial Plan, the government wants to expand war industries, increase arms exports by 50%, create 125,000 jobs by 2035, and reduce what Carney has called Canada's military dependency on the United States. This is leading the government to try to extract domestic economic gains from its defense spending. Recent decisions include the planned purchase of Saab Global Eye surveillance planes, choosing a Swedish firm over American options that will be partially made in Bombardier's Toronto facility. It also informed this week's decision to pursue a purchase of up to 12 modern submarines from TKMS in a new partnership with Norway and Germany, which the government says will lead to tens of billions of dollars in lucrative maintenance and other work inside Canada over the coming decades. The idea is to increase defense spending inside Canada where we can, Furr said, adding that for the utility vehicles, we've got a number of good companies in Canada that can deliver on this. He also downplayed any concern that such decisions could irk Trump, who has imposed trade tariffs and mused about annexing Canada through economic force. We're a sovereign country and we make our own decisions, and they're thoughtful decisions, Furr said. That doesn't mean the door is closed on procuring military hardware from the U.S., he added, noting recent decisions to buy more than a dozen HIMARS artillery systems from U.S. company Lockheed Martin for $2.6 billion and up to 16 P-8 Poseidon multi-mission planes from American firm Boeing for more than $5 billion. It's not like we're not spending money with our ally, the United States, Furr said, stressing, however, that the government's focus is now on maximizing the use of Canadian capacity. Canada's got great credibility and capacity, and I think we've largely ignored over the years, and we're not in a position to do that anymore, so we're not going to do it, he said. The next article is titled, Poilievre says PM backed wrong pipeline route to BC's coast. Tory leader says southern port will hurt exports to Asia. And this is by Raisa Patel. Prime Minister Mark Carney says a new oil pipeline from Alberta to British Columbia's southwest coast will reduce Canada's reliance on sales to the United States and boost the country's capacity for exports to Asia. But Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has warned that rejecting a pipeline route to BC's northwest coast will simply lead tankers to take the oil south down to California west coast. It takes about 36 hours less time to get to Asia from northern BC as it does from southern BC, and that's because of the curvature of the Earth. It's just simple geometry. The further north you go, the shorter the curve you have to travel to get to the other side of the pond. Poilievre said at a news conference last week. That's why we believe that the best place to put a pipeline is to Prince Rupert or Kitimat, which can take 1 million barrels, mostly to Asia. So would the proposed pipeline's terminus frustrate Carney's goal of diversifying Canada's oil exports and only benefit the U.S. On distance, Poilievre is right, although his estimate of a northern export terminal shaving 36 hours off total shipping time differs from some sources. The shipping route from Prince Rupert, BC to Shanghai, China is about 500 to 900 nautical miles, shorter than the route from Delta in southwestern BC, depending on which path is taken. There are more factors that determine where oil products end up than their shipping routes, said Michael Moore, a senior fellow at the University of Calgary and a former energy commissioner for the state of California. This is a complex question that gets distorted because the shipping distance is not the most important variable in the end, said Moore. It's one, certainly, but it may not be the most dominant question to answer when making a final decision about whether to build a facility that has to last 30 to 35 years in order to pay itself back. To that end, California is currently in the business of shutting down a lot of our existing refineries, and refinery capacity is shrinking because of regulatory changes and because of the decline in overall market share for that product, said Moore. You don't just ship to a place because it's easier to get to. You've got to have somewhere to sell it, and you've got to have somewhere to process it once it gets there. Kent Fellows, an economist and associate professor at the University of Calgary, isn't worried about American markets solely reaping the benefits of a new pipeline. Once you get crude oil or bitumen on a tanker, you really have optionality to ship it almost anywhere in the world, as long as they have an import terminal, he said. Closer ports may be a bit of a cost advantage, but those costs, once you get it on a tanker, are so low compared to pipeline or rail costs shipping over land. Alberta crude oil was overwhelmingly exported to the United States before the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion became operational in 2024. According to Canadian International Merchandise Trade Statistics, within the first 12 months of the pipeline opening, total crude oil volumes exported through British Columbia surged by more than sixfold, Statistics Canada wrote in a 2025 report. The United States remained the primary destination, even as it fell to 51.9% from May 2024 to April 2025, compared to 100% in the previous 12 months. But that pipeline, which also terminates in southern BC, had an outsized effect elsewhere. In that same 2024-25 timeframe, 48.1% of crude oil exports went to countries beyond the U.S. China accounted for almost a third of total exports at 31.9%, followed by Hong Kong at 7.1% and Singapore at 6.3%. South Korea and India made up 1.6% and 1.2% of exports by volume, respectively. We are setting records on the amount of crude oil that we ship to Asia. A lot of those shipments from the Trans Mountain expansion are headed for Asia, Fellows said. And I need to stop one more time to remind you that you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The next article is titled, "Our Job is to Keep the Institution Safe. Jail official targeted in murder plot tells court he was vigilant against contraband, never abusive. And this is by Brendan Kennedy. The Toronto jail official, who police say was targeted in a murder plot potentially over his drug enforcement, testified Wednesday that he was always vigilant in trying to prevent contraband from entering the facility, but never abusive. Our job is to keep the institution safe first and foremost, he said. The official, who cannot be identified due to a publication ban, was testifying as part of a legal application by the Toronto South Detention Center, that's TSDC, inmate to have his gun trafficking convictions thrown out because of abuse he alleges he suffered while awaiting trial at the jail. It is believed to be the first time the jail official has spoken in public forum since the attack at his home was described in the February announcement of the shocking arrests of 7 Toronto police officers in what's known as Project South. The inmates' convictions are not related to Project South. In order to protect the official's identity, the courts took the unusual step of erecting wall-to-wall room dividers in front of the public gallery of the court to prevent any member of the public from seeing the official while he testified. An additional screen was set up to prevent the inmate from seeing him from the prisoner's box. Plainclothes police officers were also present both inside and outside the courtroom. The inmate, Joshua James Malcolm Evans, and 3 other current or former TSDC inmates have accused the jail official of overseeing abusive enforcement practices against inmates, including unjustified strip searches and forced bowel movements in front of the guards. The official has denied all of the allegations against him, saying in an affidavit filed with the court that he prides himself on his professionalism and integrity. Previous reporting by the Star has found that the official has a reputation for a strict approach to rooting out contraband in the jail. His style has been lauded as effective by some colleagues, while others have told the Star it sometimes veered into cruelty. Similar allegations were made against the official in at least one other court case in which he was not called as a witness. Investigators have identified the official's enforcement at the jail as a potential motive for why he was targeted. In recently released court documents, police alleged that an inmate in the South may have been the one who directed the murder plot. 3 masked gunmen were arrested outside the official's Markham home in the middle of the night on June 20, 2025, in a dramatic takedown by York Regional Police, who were lying in wait after the home was cased by suspicious individuals the day before. Earlier in the week, Malcolm Evans was cross-examined by Crown Attorney Moaz Karimji, who accused him of making up the allegations against the jail official because he knew the official's life had been threatened and would therefore be reluctant to appear in court to defend himself. Malcolm Evans denied this, pointing to how he took contemporaneous notes of his alleged mistreatment at the jail before the attack on the jail official's home. In an affidavit filed in court, the jail official said Malcolm Evans threatened him after refusing to comply with a strip search. "Just wait and see what happens. You have no idea who you're messing with," the inmate is alleged to have said to the official, according to the official's affidavit and an incident report he wrote at the time. When asked about the threat during cross-examination, Malcolm Evans denied it, suggesting it would be irrational because of the power the official had. If the judge agrees the jail breached Malcolm Evans' charter rights, she could stay his charges, effectively throwing out his conviction. She could also reduce his sentence if she feels a lesser remedy is warranted, or she could find that no violations occurred. The jail official will continue his testimony Thursday. Next article is Police Recruit Killed in Crash ID'd. 27-year-old cadet remembered as kind and dedicated. And this is by Xavier Mesquita. Durham police say the 27-year-old training recruit killed in a highway crash in southwestern Ontario on Tuesday is being remembered for his determination, humility, and an unwavering commitment to serving those around him. The constable in training was identified by police on Wednesday as Tyrone Megbetang, who died en route to training at the Ontario Police College in Aylmer. In a news release, Durham Regional Police said that the service was profoundly saddened by the death of the constable in training. Megbetang joined the force as a special constable in May 2023, according to the release, before being selected as a police constable recruit in April. Tyrone was a compassionate, dedicated, and service-driven individual who believed deeply in helping others and making a positive difference in the community, the release said. He will be remembered for his kindness, professionalism, and the tremendous potential he brought to our organization, it added. Police said that Megbetang would be transported from London, Ontario, to the Centre for Forensic Sciences in Toronto on Wednesday, where loved ones and members of the Durham Regional Police Service will accompany him to show their respects for his service. Police asked for the privacy of Megbetang's family, and those mourning to be respected. The Elgin branch of the Ontario Provincial Police responded to the collision between a transport truck and sedan at the intersection of Imperial Road and College Line just after 11 a.m., according to a social media post by police. Aylmer is about a 45-minute drive southeast from London, Ontario. One person was pronounced dead and the other was taken to a local hospital, authorities said. The transport driver was uninjured. The circumstances around the crash are being probed by the OPP. The next article is titled Captive Belugas Get a Lifeline. U.S. approves emergency rescue of animals at shuttered Marineland. And this is by Liam Casey. U.S. authorities have approved an emergency rescue operation to import Canada's last captive whales and dolphins, a consortium of marine parks said Wednesday. The shuttered Niagara Falls, Ontario tourist attraction is up for sale, and the park has said it is running out of money to care for its complement of 30 belugas and 4 dolphins. Ottawa endorsed last month a plan to move the animals to several facilities in the United States and one in Spain. The whales are set to go to 5 marine parks: Shedd Aquarium in Chicago, Georgia Aquarium in Atlanta, SeaWorld locations in San Antonio and San Diego, and Oceanographic Valencia in Spain. The U.S. parks are part of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, who rallied to help Marineland after Ottawa nixed last fall a request for permits to export the whales to an aquarium in China. In response to that decision from the Canadian government, Marineland made international headlines when it threatened to euthanize all of its belugas if it didn't receive emergency funds. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration authorized the emergency rescue on July 1 after entering into an agreement with SeaWorld, Georgia Aquarium, and the Shedd Aquarium, said Rachel Hager, a spokesperson for the agency. The emergency import of these beluga whales to U.S. facilities is necessary to ensure the whales receive medical treatment and care that is not otherwise available, Hager said in an email. Marineland of Canada closed to the public in 2024, and there are no other facilities in Canada that are able to provide the whales husbandry or medical care. The U.S. government agency said it has authorized a move of up to 28 belugas. It's believed 2 other belugas and 4 dolphins would head to Spain. The American Parks Consortium said they are still awaiting permits from the Spanish government. It is set to be an unprecedented move with the number of whales involved. Marineland has the highest number of captive belugas in the world. The U.S. Aquariums said it will be a remarkably complex rescue operation. This collective of aquariums is well positioned for this extraordinary task, thanks to decades of beluga care experience and having collaborated on several successful beluga rescues in the past, said Johnny Ford, a spokesperson for the Shedd Aquarium and the rest of the consortium. Marineland said it welcomed the U.S. authorization of the relocation. We recognize we can no longer provide the long-term care these animals require, and we believe this rescue, led by AZA accredited aquariums including Shedd Aquarium, Georgia Aquarium, SeaWorld San Antonio, and SeaWorld San Diego, is in the whales' best interest, Marineland said. Care teams will arrive in the coming weeks to assess the whales and prepare them for travel, and no whale will move until cleared by Canadian veterinarians. Canada's Department of Fisheries and Oceans issued the first batch of permits to export the whales and dolphins in early June and will have to sign off on the final permits once they check the health of the animals. This is an encouraging and critical next step for the safe relocation of the whales, said Fisheries Minister Joanne Thompson in a statement. Thompson said she'll give a final sign-off once the animal's health check is complete and the appropriate documentation is submitted. The U.S. agreement shows 13 belugas will head to SeaWorld in San Antonio, 6 that originally came from Russian waters, and 7 that were born at Marineland. They are a mix of male and female whales. 3 male belugas born at Marineland will head to SeaWorld in San Diego, while another 2 males born at the park will head to the Georgia Aquarium. And 10 belugas, 8 females from Russian waters, along with 2 males born at Marineland, will be shipped off to the Shedd Aquarium in Chicago. The whales and dolphins will likely be moved in the next few months. And I needed to pause once more to remind you that you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The next article is titled, NDP Hopes Greenbelt Scandal Haunts Ford. Stiles marks probe's 1,000-day mark ahead of by-election in Scarborough. This is by Robert Benzie. As the RCMP's Greenbelt investigation continues, the New Democrats hope the looming Scarborough Southwest by-election is a referendum on Premier Doug Ford. NDP leader Marit Stiles served up a cake at Queen's Park to mark 1,000 days since the Mounties began a criminal probe into the $8.28 billion land swap scandal. When it comes to corruption, Doug Ford takes the cake, Stiles quipped Wednesday as she touted the NDP's chances of holding Scarborough Southwest when Ford calls by-elections there and in the progressive conservative stronghold of York Simcoe this summer. While the RCMP has interviewed at least 30 current and former aides to the Premier as part of its investigation, it has not met with him. Ford maintains he did nothing wrong in his aborted scheme to open up 7,400 acres of protected greenbelt land to housing development and has pledged to cooperate with the Mounties. Detectives from the elite RCMP branch that investigates corruption and political crimes launched their probe on October 10, 2023. Be assured that the RCMP's Sensitive and International Investigations Unit is conducting a thorough investigation, the federal police force said in a statement Wednesday. That investigation is ongoing. To protect the integrity of the investigation, we cannot provide information at this time. The RCMP must ensure that criminal investigations are not compromised by sharing information publicly, the Mounties said. It was launched after the Auditor General and the Integrity Commissioner each released reports in August 2023, revealing developers linked to Ford's progressive conservatives were favored in an unusual process that led to protected land being rezoned for housing. 2 cabinet ministers and a pair of senior PC staffers lost their jobs as part of the fallout. Even though the Tories were re-elected last year with a third consecutive majority, despite the Greenbelt affair, and still lead in the polls, Stiles, who has been canvassing in Scarborough Southwest, insisted people are really fed up. When I'm out listening to people and knocking on doors and connecting with Ontarians, it gets raised multiple times a day, the NDP leader said of the controversy. There's a lot of anxiety out there, and people are saying, after 8 years of Doug Ford, what have we got to show for it? She said, pointing to concerns about services and affordability. To that end, Stiles is hopeful voters will send a message to Ford's Tories and elect a new Democratic candidate, Fatima Shaban, a tenant advocate in Scarborough Southwest, to succeed former NDP MPP Dolly Begum, who is now the riding's federal Liberal MP. But the provincial Liberals have high hopes for their candidate, Ahsanul Hafiz, owner of 30 Domino's pizza outlets. Hafiz is the political rookie who defeated one-time Liberal leadership hopeful Nate Erskine Smith, who was then the Grit MP from neighboring Beaches, East York, in a bruising nomination in May. Erskine Smith's last day as an MP was Tuesday. Ford's Tories will hold a nomination meeting Thursday night. As of Wednesday afternoon, their website listed the candidates as accountant Murshed Nizam, social worker Aisha Sardar, human relations project manager Ghazi Sijan, and family physician Dr. Azam Nurullah Taran. In York Simcoe, the Premier appointed East Gwillimbury Town Councillor Susan Lahi to be the PC candidate to succeed former Minister Carolyn Mulroney, who resigned last month. This article that I'm going to read next is under the byline of defense, and it says number of new subs still undecided, evolving tech costs among factors as talks begin with German shipbuilder. This is by Alex Bollingal. Canada might not buy a full slate of 12 submarines through its new partnership with Germany and Norway because of factors like advancing technology in autonomous underwater machines, says the government's Secretary of State for Defense Procurement. In an interview with The Star on Wednesday, Stephen Furr said the government has not settled on how many 212CD submarines it will ultimately buy as negotiations begin on the purchase of up to 12 of the modern diesel-electric craft from German-based shipbuilder TKMS. Prime Minister Mark Carney said 4 of the submarines are slated to arrive by 2034, but Fur told the Star the first one is currently on track to arrive in early 2033, while the timing of the others is part of the talks with TKMS and German and Norwegian partners. Those negotiations, he said, could be finalized over the next 6 months. Carney also billed the purchase as the largest procurement in Canadian history, worth tens of billions of dollars, and first stressed on Wednesday that the government intends to buy several new submarines to replace its aging second-hand fleet of 4 Victoria-class subs. What we don't know is what the final number is going to be, First said. The overall cost of the purchase is obviously going to be a factor. Fur continued, declining to disclose even the rough order of magnitude for how much the submarines will cost, as negotiations begin to play out with TKMS over the contract. Another consideration, Fur said, is emerging technology that may affect the government's calculus for how many submarines it needs, as production and deliveries of TKMS craft for Canada stretch into the next decade. Fur also noted his recent travels to Australia, where he visited an Anduril Industries facility where the company is building Ghost Shark autonomous submarines, which are being built for the Australian Navy and use technology from Canadian firm Kraken Robotics. Writing recently in The Walrus, former Conservative leader Erin O'Toole also asked whether the government should buy fewer than 12 submarines alongside uncrewed subs like the Ghost Shark. Should we be buying, say, 8 and supplementing them with dozens and dozens of relatively inexpensive autonomous underwater vehicles that can conduct military patrols in the Arctic, gathering intelligence, detecting incursions, protecting critical infrastructure, years before the first submarine arrives, O'Toole wrote. While noting the potential for such machines, Fur stressed that Canadian Navy needs new submarines for their ability to deter adversaries by operating stealthily underwater all over the world. Nothing really replaces the sub for persistence, deterrence, and all the things it can do, but there are some very, very interesting new capable emergency technologies that can work with a sub, Fur said. I'm not saying that new technology will replace them. Absolutely not. We need the submarines, he said. But if we're talking about factors that could drive the number of, at the end of the day, cost is one, complementary technologies is another. And I will end here with, you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the July 9 issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Jane. Thank you for listening.